Right, and we should be live. Let me make sure everything is set up correctly. I'm going to wait also to see if anyone joins in. Looking good so far. Alright, seem to be up on both. Looking good, looking good. Alright, let me close out of this while I'm live streaming. That way my laptop doesn't have a heart attack. No, actually, let me bring it up one more time to make sure I typed in everything correctly. Live reading The Room. Okay. Everything's set up correctly. Awesome. Hello! Alright. Just making sure that everything's set up correctly. Still new to multi-streaming, and I wish I could get it set up on Rumble, but I can't. I have yet to find a free way to multi-stream which includes Rumble. So for right now, it's just YouTube and Twitch. Alright. Let me make sure I've got everything else up here. Alright, so let me go ahead and get started. Just a few things to go over first. Long story short, I'm writing a bunch of short stories and eventually novellas and full-length novels. And everything that I write, unless stated otherwise, hail, is going to be part of basically my own little fictional universe called the Trilateral Realms. Actually, while listening to the live stream I was just on, sorry, name escapes me, brain, bleh. I was working on trying to figure out the logo that I'm trying to put together, but anyway, a couple of days ago, the first short story that I read was called Mirror, Mirror, and that, along with the story that I'm going to read today, was part of something that I released on Amazon, little Kindle book thing. I should not have put that out. They weren't ready, and chocked full of mistakes, so I gotta get them edited, although I want to learn to edit them myself, just because I want to rely on myself for as much as I absolutely possibly can. But this is the other story that was in there, and the next story that I read I'm kind of keeping a secret until the actual live stream, but you know, The Room and Mirror Mirror were technically stories that I wrote. I thought it was back in 2014, but it was actually back in 2013, so it's been about 10 years, and after 10 years I'm just now going back and fixing these up and re-releasing them. So there are some changes to the original version that was available for about 10 years, and it's going to take me a while to read through this, so let me go ahead and get started. It's about 17 pages, and I gotta read slow because I am very prone to making mistakes, and afterwards I am going to post a story-only version where I take out as many of the mistakes as I can possibly edit out as possible, which is going to take a little while. So anyway, all that being said, let's go ahead and get started. This is The Room. A child's scream rang out through the infinite blackness. He could hear it all around. As he fell, the sound grew faint until at last it was gone. He continued to fall, not knowing what awaited him below. Moments later, a beam of light shone through. It was accompanied by a woman's scream, and followed him on his plummet. Soon it was joined by another, and another, each one coming from someone different. The orchestra of men, women, and children was so piercing and bright that he grasped his ears and closed his eyes. All at once they stopped. He opened his eyes to find himself lying on the floor. He did not remember landing. As he got to his feet, he could see that he was in a hospital room. The sound of a heart monitor pulsed beside a lone bed. As he approached the monitor, flatlined. The chest of the figure in the bed lowered for the last time. Their face had already been covered, as if death was inevitable. He slowly approached the bed and lifted the sheet. Before he had a chance to see the face beneath, he awoke with a start. He had no idea where he was or how long he had been there. His head was spinning. The bed he was laying in was so comfortable that he half considered just going back to sleep, but curiosity got the better of him. As he sat up, he took in what he could of his surroundings. There was no light, but the white walls gave him a basic idea of what the room looked like. Silhouettes littered 2 of the walls, and his bed sat against a third. The last of the 4 walls in this perfectly square room was too dark to make out clearly. It had a reflective quality that led him to the conclusion that the whole thing was one huge mirror. One thing he did not see was a door. An icy sensation ran through him as he placed his feet on the tiled floor. His feet quickly made their way into a pair of slippers nearby. Instinctively, he found his way to a light switch at the far end of the room and flicked it upward. As the room slowly blinked into view, he was able to get a clearer picture of his situation. It was like a tiny studio apartment. The bed had its own wall, and on the wall the head was against, there were 3 tall cabinets. On the opposite wall from the bed, he found a shower, sink, and another smaller cabinet. He assumed the cabinets contained the essentials he couldn't see, such as food and clothes. He was not sure why he was so confident of this, and much like the images from his dream, these thoughts were fading. Even now, as he looked about, there was no door in sight. A stinging sensation in his arm broke his concentration. His eyes followed the pain to a tiny hole halfway between his wrist and elbow. Had he been drugged? He tried to remember the last thing he could think of, but mostly drew a blank. Only scattered bits remained. Alex. His name was Alex. He was some sort of scientist. Alex tried to remember more, but these 2 fragments were all that he could recall, and even now they seemed to drift somewhere into his subconscious. He turned to the last wall. It was all one giant mirror, as he had suspected. As he gazed at his reflection, he was struck with the sense that something was very wrong. He looked ragged, as if he had been through hell. Had he been tortured? If he had, he didn't feel like it, minus the sore arm. The bags under his eyelids led him to the conclusion that he had just woken up from the first sleep he had had in days. His skin was a sickly pale color that yearned for sunlight, almost matching the pajamas he was wearing. His hair was a tangled mess of knots. Alex's eyes widened. The mirror was the way out. He didn't know how he knew it, but he was certain. At first, he tried pushing on it. When that failed to yield results, he moved his hand along the surface and edges, looking for something hidden. Still, he was met with only disappointment. Taking a step back, the thought crossed his mind that someone may be on the other side watching him. "Hello?" No answer. He tried knocking as hard as he dared for fear of the glass shattering on his knuckles, then kicked it with all his might. Still silence, and not even a crack. No one was coming for him. He could feel it. He turned back fully, taking in what he had to look forward to. The bed was modest, but large enough, and had thick, cozy sheets with a large, puffy pillow. The 4 cabinets looked to be made of a polished mahogany and were pleasantly simple in design. The bedroom area seemed adequate enough, even if the glass shower would leave little to the imagination. In the middle of the room was a black table and matching chair, which looked comfortable as well. The floor was made of simple white tiles, and the ceiling was just as plain. Alex had a feeling he was going to be here a while, and the inviting simplicity of it all did as much as it could to ease his concern about that. He walked over to the chair and sat down. Who are you? Where are you? Why are you here? These questions burned like an inferno in his mind. This was no prison. It was way too pleasant looking for that. Besides, if he was being punished for something, why take away his memory of the supposed crime? Maybe it was some sort of experiment. If he really was a scientist, this seemed to make the most sense. Something to do with isolation, perhaps? But what would be the point of wiping his memory? Maybe that was the point. But what possible scientific purpose could that serve? Alex's train of thought... Okay, I'm going to start that sentence over. Alex's train of thought was interrupted by the growling of his stomach. He hoped he was right about the cabinets containing food. Otherwise, this would not be a pleasant stay. He first checked the lone cabinet beside the sink. It was a basic linen closet with towels, soap, shampoo, and even changes of clothes, all of which were the same outfit he was wearing. He then made his way to the second wall and opened the cabinet next to the shower. Inside, he found basic supplies for doing what little cleaning and maintenance the room required. The middle cabinet had all sorts of games and activity supplies, lending even more to Alex's theory for an extended stay. Finally, he came to the last cabinet, and to his great delight, it was filled with labelless pop-top cans with plastic spoons secured to them. Grabbing a can at random, he quickly made his way to the table and peeled off the lid. His smile quickly faded as the sight of the sludge-like substance inside came upon him. Some fragment of his subconscious told him this stuff was some sort of non-perishable concoction, even if it looked like it had never been fresh to begin with. The smell was in stark contrast to the look. A pleasant aroma was slowly emitting from the can and increasing his appetite. Closing his eyes, he scooped up a spoonful and forced it into his mouth. The taste was thankfully akin to the smell, and made it very easy for Alex to shove the rest of it down. The can wasn't that big, and he was surprised at how full it made him when he dropped the spoon into the empty metal shell. Leaning back in the chair, he finally gave himself a moment to relax. He looked about the room and noticed something strange. Of all the things the room contained, there wasn't a clock anywhere to be found. Whoever put him in here must not have concerns of time. I read the wrong, but I'm continuing. Basic gist. Again, his thoughts drifted to the reason for all this, but given the lack of clues, he quickly looked for something else to occupy his mind. The middle cabinet... Let me start that over. The middle cabinet had just the escape his mind craved. From the top shelf, he grabbed a deck of cards and returned to the table. As he shuffled, he tried to think of all the card games he could. For now, the only solo game that he could think of was solitaire, so he laid out the cards and got started. He wasn't sure how many games he had played, but it felt as if it took several hours. His eyes were heavy. The lack of sleep seemed to be catching up to him. This didn't bother him too much, as it was an excuse to return to the comfy bed. Alex turned out the lights and quickly drifted back to sleep. It was a mostly peaceful slumber, though he could swear he could hear the sound of gears turning in his dreams. When he finally woke, he felt much more rested than the day before. Or was it a day? Without a way of keeping time, he had no idea how long had actually passed. Regardless of this, he turned the light back on and was ready for another round. Alex looked at the table. He hardly remembered clearing it, as he was half awake at the time. Thinking of yesterday made him decide to start by eating to avoid the annoyance of his stomach again. And he went back to the food cabinet. As he opened it to grab the can for the next day... Woo, let me start that over. As he opened it, he grabbed the can next to the empty one he had put back. The can that had been empty, that is. In his shock, Alec dropped the one he was holding. Grabbing the once empty can, he felt the back of the cabinet and noticed that it was made of panels that led out. He ran to the side and tried to move the cabinet. No matter how hard he pushed, it made no difference. It was like trying to get out of the mirror. Even if he could get out, what was on the other side of the cabinet, he imagined... let me start that over. I'm so bad at this. Even if he could get to what was on the other side of the cabinet, he imagined it was probably just a bunch of small holes he wouldn't fit through anyway. Studying the cabinet did, however, make him aware of a layer of dust that had gathered on it. The supplies cabinet had plenty of cleaning wipes, and he set about scrubbing the cabinet until it practically shined. Soon he realized that this helped take his mind off of his predicament, and he set about cleaning the entire room. By the time he had finished, the room looked so sanitary he almost didn't want to touch anything else. After all the work he had done cleaning, he had worked up quite a sweat and decided now was a good time as any to try out the shower. He didn't care if anyone was watching. The water felt fantastic and caused him to stand for so long that he nearly collapsed from exhaustion. When he finally did leave, he went straight for the activity cabinet and pulled out the first board game that caught his eye. He didn't know how to play, so he took a moment to read the instructions and found that as he read, and after he played for a time, the premise started to come back to him. Excited by this development, he played until he was tired again, stopping only once when his stomach reminded of him how long it had been ignored. From then on, he started into a routine. He would begin with a meal in what could have been called the morning, cleaned for a while, showered, then tried another game to regain a bit of his memory. It didn't even bother him that the memories were useless. It gave him a good feeling knowing that something was returning to him. After all the board games had been tried, as well as a few more card games that had drifted back into his mind, Alex made his way to the bottom of the cabinet, which had a large supply of art materials. He grabbed a pen and paper and went to the table. He figured he might as well keep track of time the best he could. Since he had no way of telling the number of days he had spent in the room, he decided to consider each time he slept as a cycle. He figured he had slept about 20 times so far, so he made as many tallies in the paper. 50 tallies. 100 tallies. On the cycles went, and with them Alex's fleeting hope for answers or escape. The games had become stale and boring, and even the pleasant taste of the deceptive sludge had started to lose its luster. I actually misspelled that. I need to go back. Alex had moved on to more trivial activities like counting floor tiles and the number of sheets of paper he had left. He wondered if the paper would replenish when it was gone, like the food cans. other items had. Even the clothes came in freshly laundered when he woke. In his bedroom, he would sometimes even... In his boredom... Okay, let me start that over. In his boredom, he would sometimes even fold his used clothes before putting them back in the cabinets, even though it didn't seem to affect how the clean ones came in. He was doing a lot of things out of boredom recently, to the point where he was sure he would go crazy. All of this might just have driven him there without someone to talk to. That's when an idea came to him. He grabbed a sheet of paper and drew a large circle. In the circle, he made 2 large black dots, followed by a large curved line beneath. Alex didn't care much for adding a nose to this simple, smiling face, but he felt it did need more character somehow. With a single pen stroke, he added a lone strand of hair at the top of the head, and on the right cheek, he drew 3 small lines that looked like a scratch. Content with his new friend, Alex now had to give him a name. Jack. It just popped into his head. He tried to remember why the name was lurking in his subconscious. He knew it had significant meaning, but couldn't put his finger onto why. Though it was a crude drawing, Alex soon found that it was incredibly easy to think of Jack as another living, breathing being. He would sometimes talk to Jack until he fell asleep at the table, ignoring his hunger for cycles at a time. As hundreds more cycles passed, Alex slowly lost the sense that Jack was not real. No, he was real, and Alex would do whatever it took to protect him. Every cycle, he would jump up and run to the table to make sure that Jack was still there, still ready to greet him with that happy smile. That's when the thought came that pushed him over the edge. He would not be in here forever. One day, whoever was doing this experiment or whatever it was would make him leave. But he did not want to leave. Leave Jack? Maybe they would force him to give up Jack. Force him to leave Jack behind. Maybe they would do it while he slept so he could do nothing to stop them. He had to stop them. It had to be now. He would never leave Jack. Alex ran to the mirror and started slamming his fist against it over and over until his knuckles bled. "I know you can hear me," he screamed. "Let me out." Maybe if he showed how crazy he'd become, they would rush in and try to stop him from going berserk. He picked up the chair and threw it at the mirror. Still not a crack. He returned to yelling all sorts of obscenities and eventually devolved into gibberish, continuing until his voice was hoarse. Still, no one came for him. He figured he would have better luck just asking to leave. That was it. Somehow the thought was all he needed. Alex took a deep breath and said, "I'm ready to leave." Just like that, the hum of machines roared through the air as the mirrored wall slowly lifted. Soon, it was out of sight. He wasn't even sure what to do now. He had lived in the room nearly 800 cycles. The outside world was now as foreign to him as the room had been the first time he woke in it. As he stepped out, there was a crunch beneath his feet. A broken syringe. The contents, long since gone, lay at the floor. He looked around this strange new place and found it was not quite what he had imagined. It was a lab, to be certain, one covered in dust and littered with all sorts of experiments and papers scattered carelessly about. He looked back. The room itself was a box with all sorts of machinery connected to it, providing power, plumbing, and various methods for resupplying the different cabinets. It was an engineering marvel, a large box meant to keep someone alive without ever needing to leave. The machine ran past the lab and far into the distance. Numerous backup systems were in place, ensuring that the room would never need outside maintenance. As Alex looked around, it became apparent why. There was no one else but him. No scientists performing experiments. No men in suits taking down notes on behaviors and activities. It was as if he had been cast away from the world and never expected to return. He walked over to a large table that was scattered with notes in a handwriting that was his own, a personal journal of sorts. The pages told the tale of a virus that had spread through the world, one that killed everyone who was infected. On another table were vials of a bright blue liquid held in a container. One of the slots had been emptied. There was no doubt in his mind that this was the drug that had taken his memories. Near the end of the table was a photograph that caught his eye. There was a small boy laying in a hospital bed, doing his best to smile. He would have been bald, except for a single strand of hair poking out of the top of his head. He had a faded scar on his right cheek that appeared to have been from some sort of animal. Jack. The name now not only had a real face, but a story to go along with it. A man sat at his son's bedside, trying his best to hold back tears. He had been too late. That was the least of his woes. In a rush to make a cure for the rare new disease that had threatened Jack's life, he had accidentally created a virus. He was warned not to try it. So many warnings. But he was sure it was safe. He had tested it on himself after all, and he was just fine. Somehow it had turned airborne and spread across the planet. It took less than a month for the whole world to be consumed as the virus rapidly evolved to become even more potent and deadly. No one was safe from its effects. Almost no one. He looked out of the open window. Wind from the dead earth blew in, as if to comfort him in his moment of grief. Jack lay motionless. It was hard to tell whether it was the disease that killed him or the virus. It didn't matter now. As he returned to his lab, the man placed the last photograph... Let me start that over. As he returned to his lab, the man placed the last photograph he had taken of his son on a table and grabbed a syringe. He filled it with a bright blue liquid and stabbed it into his arm. He took one last look at the photo before pressing his thumb down. The serum he had been working on was not complete and wouldn't ensure that the memories would be completely gone, but hopefully it would allow him to live the rest of his life free from the overbearing guilt of what he had done. He walked into a room he had been creating for the better part of a decade. It was meant to study the effects of long periods of isolation and would now be his home. He made many modifications to ensure that it would never need to be repaired and could support life for at least 100 years, though he would not need it for nearly that long. Before he closed the room, he took a clock off of the wall and threw it away as far as he could. What good was time to him now? His memories were leaving him fast, and he knew he might forget how to leave the room. He didn't care. He had no plans to leave. Alex just stood there. He was unsure of how to take it all in. He was alone. He would always be. It was his own damn fault. He should have done more tests, taken his time. It would have been too late for Jack no matter what. He should have made the cure for someone who still had time or had yet to get the disease. He couldn't protect Jack. Despite all his knowledge and skills, he couldn't even save his own son. And now he had wiped out anyone who would care to help him through the pain. Now that pain was back, and it was once again too much to take. He made up another syringe and stabbed it into his veins. Slowly, the memories of the room faded from him. As he stepped back in, he turned back and said, "I'm ready to stay." The mirrored wall began to close behind him. He walked over and turned off the light. The room went as dark as the void in his mind was becoming, freeing him from the past, freeing him from the guilt. He lay down and closed his eyes. Soon he would be rid of it all, cleansed of his crimes, at least in his mind. All of it would soon be nothing more than an echo in the back of his thoughts. Soon he would be home, safe and sound, in the quiet and comfort of the room. The end. Whew. Oh my goodness. How long did that take? Oh wow, I've only been live for about 30 minutes. I thought it was going to take me an hour to get through that whole thing. So yeah, that was the second of a series of short stories I'm working on. My plan is, once I have about maybe 6 or 7 stories fully completed, I want to compile them together into a book called Tales from the Trilateral Realms. And once I have a good amount of those done, yeah. But once I have a good amount of those done, I'm going to start on 2 novella series. The way I'm kind of doing this is like, basically think of the novellas that I'm writing as TV shows and the novels I'm writing as movies. And each novella series is going to be 12 books long. So like a 12-episode TV series kind of thing. The first one that I'm working on, which I had also posted a really early, really bad draft that's getting a complete overhaul, is called Midnight Falls. And Midnight Falls is going to consist of 12 books. The first one is going to be called The House on the Edge of Town. And it's going to be sort of a like a young adult coming of age with some nice supernatural elements. I'm still working on a full synopsis. And then the other one is going to be kind of a medieval fantasy pulp series called I, the Nameless Knight. And I'm just going to keep the details on that scarce for the time being. But yeah. Oh, there's 2 people watching now. Any questions? You should close out of this while I'm waiting. And also, one other thing I want to mention is when I had originally posted The Room to Amazon, it was like The Room, and then the first short story, Mirror Mirror, was kind of like a little bonus story add-on to it, even though I'd technically written that one first, which is why I'm releasing these videos in order of when I had actually written them. The picture you're actually seeing, hopefully it's showing up, is a redone drawing of the original cover that I had. But I don't know, they were I guess I had done it in too compressed of a file size, so when I tried to post that as the cover on Amazon, it did not look right, so I wound up having to go with basically just white text on a black background. It was kind of dull. But yeah, not exactly an artist, but I am working on it. I don't have any way of scanning like hand-drawn stuff in, but I do have a tablet, or an actual like drawing tablet that I'm going to be practicing with. Oh, yes. Before I actually compile them into the book, once I actually have them edited correctly, I am going to post them on Substack. I already set up the account. I just haven't actually posted anything there, except I think there was like this automatically posted thing that it auto-generated. But yeah. I still need to figure out exactly how Substack works, too. I was just kind of learning as I go with this. But I'm hoping that my art skills get good enough to where when I start doing the actual novellas that I can actually do the artwork for them. I'm actually using, what program am I using? Krita is what I'm working with right now, although I got to figure out how to do lettering in it. I mean, the lettering for this, for the room, I did very much intentionally as kind of like a scribble thing. But for Mirror Mirror, I am putting it through, funny enough, I'm putting it through a meme generator to put the letters on that, because I don't know how to do bordered letters, or I don't know if that's even a thing you can do in Krita. I tried to look to see if you could do it in GIMP, but I couldn't figure it out on my own. I might have to watch a bunch of videos. But yeah, Substack is where they're going to go once they're edited and compiled them into an actual short story compilation. I'm actually a little ways into the third story that I'm working on right now, which is going to be the first new story that I've done that I've actually had finished in about a decade. So really excited about that, because I tried to become an author a while back, but I'm not exactly sure if there would have been an audience for it, and even if there was, I don't really think there was a system in place to where I could have reached anyone, which is why I'm glad that the Iron Age came along. I'm like, hey, wait a minute, it's all the complaints I have about modern media, and I've got all these stories. Oh, something I want to mention about the Trilateral Realms project that I'm working on. Basically, the general idea was, all my life I have been creating stories in my head. And I think it was around the time that that Ripa started doing his Ripaverse promotion, when he was doing the actual campaign. It Hell, the Iron Age, yes. But oh God, where was I? But around that time, it popped into my head, like, why don't I take all these stories that I'm working on in my head separately for all kinds of different genres? And, I was thinking, I kind of want to do a comic, I want to do this, I want to do that. I'm like, why don't I just do all of this, not only as books, just to get them out there and started, and to build up some kind of a fan base, but also to connect them all. Basically make sure that they all take place within the same universe, the same continuity. And as I started doing that, and I started creating more stories within that continuity, and I started figuring out, okay, based on this story, how do I make that fit with this story, and make, all the lore and the way the universe works add up in the end. And man, as I started thinking about that, I got excited by what I was coming up with. I got super excited. And I'm just in the early stages too. But I have, in total, in terms of short story compilations, novellas, novella series, and full-length novels, I have over 110 stories and counting. So I am probably going to be doing this for the rest of my life. Hopefully I can start making money off of it as a result of that. That'll allow me to actually keep going with this through to the end. And I do have an end game. Yes, there's a lot. Now, granted, a lot of that is because I have a bunch of different series, and I told myself, okay, each series is going to have 12 books, 12 novellas. One of them, I'm not going to say which one as of yet, one of them is going to have a follow-up, a direct follow-up, sort of like if it's a TV series, it'd be like, a season 2. I'll leave that for a surprise when I get there, in however long it takes. But yeah, and the genres are going to run the gambit. Like I said, the two series that I'm currently focused on, one's kind of a young adult, except not crap like most young adult, I hope. And some very interesting things in there. And then the other is very much fantasy pulp. And I'll give a little hint. One of them has a bit of a noirishness to it, let's just say. But yeah, that is what I'm working on. Stories I've had for the longest time. And I'm talking ever since I was a little kid. And brand new stories that I recently came up with, and I'm connecting them all. And part of the fun of, you'll be able to read each one individually and it'll stand on its own. But if you read everything, you'll start to see different connections and the way that things interconnect together that will, at least I hope, make it a lot more interesting. This very fascinating project, I'm hoping. But yeah, that is everything. Oh my goodness. I'm going to have a lot of editing to do. But yeah, each time I finish with a short story, I'm going to do a live stream where I do a full reading with at least a, I guess a beta version of the picture that I'm going to use for it. And so probably for the rest of the night, I'm going to go in and try to see what progress I can make on making the Trilateral Realms logo, which I'm going to be putting on, once I get it done, I'm going to be putting on every Trilateral Realms project in order to make sure that it's obvious that it's all connected somehow. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and go off. I gotta edit this. I'm hoping to have this edited by Wednesday so that I can post it for the Wednesday live stream. Yeah, hope to see you there. This is Chatsu signing out.